This, however, shows, again, documentation of a broader sweep of this operation. So that's a bombshell. That's very big news that we now have documentation, and we have a clearer map of what happened. I think the real bombshell news here is, why was the FBI sitting on this for so long? That's the real bombshell news. Again, it's not as if General Flynn needed vindication. We knew that General Flynn had been set up and what the contours of that operation targeting General Flynn looked like. They were pressuring him that they were going to do damage to his son. They were going to target his son. We had a very clear picture of how this was going on, right? Why was the FBI holding on to all of this information so long? That's a bombshell.
Just what do the newly unsealed General Flynn case documents actually reveal? Are they really bombshells? Do they exonerate Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor? And was the Steele dossier really a product of Russian disinformation, as some are alleging, with Sergey Millian playing a role? In this episode, we sit down with investigative journalist Lee Smith, author of The Plot Against the President, the true story of how Congressman Devin Nunes uncovered the biggest political scandal in U.S. history. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Lee Smith, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you, Jan. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again, and especially at a momentous time, in some ways a terrible time in our history. But maybe we're coming to an end of it, and we'll start to see more things unfold.
Well, exactly, and it really is a momentous time. It really is. You know, as we speak, as we were just talking prior to the interview, new documents were released by the U.S. Attorney Xi. Or at least made public, for viewing. We have these unsealed documents from the other day that just show what a lot of people are calling a bombshell. Even the last few weeks, there's been this Senate Intelligence Committee report. There's been the footnotes. There's a lot of things related to this work on whether we call it Russia collusion or Crossfire Hurricane or Spygate, as we have at the Epoch Times. A lot is kind of coming to the surface as we speak. So a lot of people are calling the most recent documents that were unsealed a bombshell. Yeah. What are you seeing? And frankly, and we should also jump into these new ones that just came out moments ago. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we knew what happened, right? Everyone knew what happened, because the premise of the investigation into General Flynn was nonsensical from the beginning. And it's not just General Flynn's long track record. It's not just that General Flynn was the director of the DIA and that he'd served his country honorably in uniform for 33 years, including at least two combat theaters, most recently Iraq and Afghanistan. The fundamentally preposterous thing about it, and as I always try to explain to people who were curious but didn't entirely know what to understand, I said, here's what would really happen if you have a former director of the DIA who's actually suspected of collaborating in some way with a foreign power, especially an often adversarial foreign power like Russia. That's it. Everything shuts down. That person goes away to Supermax, and we probably never hear from him again, because that person has access to all sorts of different programs that would put the lives of hundreds of thousands of troops at least in danger. So the idea that what they were doing instead was running a counterintelligence investigation based on what we now know is, as one of these documents show, the information of political operative / confidential human source Stefan Halper, or it certainly looks like him. This gives us more insight into what's going on. But again, at the beginning, the very premise was outrageous and outlandish. So we did know for several years that General Flynn had been set up. Remember, this is basically, fundamentally, one of the findings from the House Intelligence Committee's March 2018 Russia report, when they had to fight with the FBI to get them to declassify different sections, both Comey and McCabe saying, yeah, we believe that General Flynn didn't lie. So if they believe that, what happened here? We knew that something had been going on for a while. So what we have right now is we have evidence of the brazenness of the operation, the brazenness of the corruption of the Crossfire Hurricane team and other FBI and DOJ officials involved in it. So again, we've known for a while what happened. This gives us more evidence of what they did, and it also gives us evidence of their attitude, of their posture, as they're targeting an American citizen primarily. This is what's key, targeting an American citizen. Yes, he was the former director of the DIA. He served his country honorably for 33 years. But again, to do this to any American citizen is disgraceful. And that's what they did, brazenly, indeed proudly. That's what they did.
So, so it doesn't sound like it's a bombshell for you.
Well, again, I think that lots of people understood what was going on. It's surprising. Again, what's surprising is how brazen they were. I'm not sure if I think a lot of people who have been involved in the investigation for a while, I'm not sure if they knew that there was going to be documentation showing precisely what happened and who was doing what and who was saying what. I'm not sure if they knew that. I've been told for several years now, look, we're going to be happy if we get a couple guys and maybe they'll flip and talk about this person and talk about that person. That will be a big win. This, however, shows, again, documentation of a broader sweep of this operation. So that's a bombshell. That's very big news that we now have documentation and we have a clearer map of what happened. I think the real bombshell news here is, why was the FBI sitting on this for so long? That's the real bombshell news. Again, it's not as if General Flynn needed vindication. We knew that General Flynn had been set up and what the contours of that operation targeting General Flynn looked like. They were pressuring him that they were going to do damage to his son. They were going to target his son. We had a very clear picture of how this was going on, right? Why was the FBI holding on to all of this information so long? That's a bombshell. And that goes back to something else that I know we'll speak about, the IG report and these newly redacted footnotes. Why was the FBI holding on to these so long? Was Christopher Wray, the director, telling people not to disclose this information? If we find out that the director of the FBI was holding on to these himself with personal involvement, that's going to be, again, more big news. We're already getting some sort of picture of what the FBI before Wray looked like, Comey's FBI, when McCabe was deputy director and then McCabe was acting director. We know now what they were doing. If this was going on when Wray was confirmed to the post in August 2017, that is going to add more detail onto a very sad story for the FBI. Sad story, a terrible story.
So there's something incredible about this. First of all, John Solomon reported that it was Bill Priestap that was the author of this handwritten note, which a lot of people are, calling the bombshell. I'm wondering if you could kind of explain what that note tells us from your view.
Right. What the note describes is it describes an FBI agent, and as you said, Solomon reported this is from a senior FBI official who is taking notes. Now it appears this is a man, and this fits the description that I've heard of Bill Priestap all along, that he's kind of a Boy Scout, right? And the idea was that I'd heard from different people that they had Priestap in the middle of this and they were taking advantage of him. They were using him basically as cover to do a whole bunch of bad things. So what this is also evidence that when they're discussing this operation targeting General Flynn, he has second thoughts about it, right? He's saying, I know what I said yesterday, but I thought about it overnight. I slept on it, and now I'm coming back, and I think maybe it's not a good idea for a number of different reasons. First of all, it's not really fair. We show people evidence all the time. Why shouldn't we show him this? And they redact out what they're talking about showing him. It's perhaps a transcript of his conversation with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, but we don't know yet. That's still redacted. And then he's wondering if what they're planning to do will not get the White House very angry. And he was correct about that. They were targeting the incoming national security advisor and also someone who had grown very close to, at the time, the president-elect, now President Donald Trump. General Flynn and President Trump traveled around a lot. They liked speaking to each other. They enjoyed each other's company. The final part of that was Priestap saying, we need to protect our institution. And to protect our institution, we probably shouldn't do this if the White House is going to turn on us and get very mad. And this is a very important insight, because here in Washington, people talk all the time about institutionalists, people who actually care more about the Department of Justice, as an example, than justice, or people who care more about the CIA than making sure that this institution, this agency, runs well and runs smoothly. It happens all throughout the Washington, and these people are referred to as institutionalists, people who place the interest of their institution above the interest of the United States of America and American citizens. As it turns out, these people at the FBI, and this is what Priestap's note underscores, these people at the FBI were not even protecting their institution, never mind the United States. They were protecting their own narrow political interest. That's what they were about. And that's another thing this underscores. That's what they were doing. This was not about their institution. This was about them, and this is something you and I have spoken about a lot, but it's very important to remember who this operation was intended to help. In the beginning, before the election, it was intended to help Hillary Clinton. After the election, the purpose of this operation was it was a massive cover-up. That's what it was. They were not about protecting institutions. They were certainly not about protecting the rights of Americans or advancing the interests of Americans. They were talking about protecting themselves and damaging other people and leaving a wake of destruction in their path like this country has never seen before.
So Lee, this is really fascinating because a lot of the commentary that I've seen thus far, and certainly what I also zeroed in on in those handwritten notes that, basically everyone is talking about right now, is this one line which apparently Bill Priestap wrote that said, are we something to the tune of, are we trying to find out the truth, or are we trying to get him to lie? I mean, this is just my very, very broad interpretation, because I don't have it right in front of me. People are calling this a kind of a smoking gun. People are calling this the bombshell, but you're kind of describing the person that wrote these notes as kind of the fall guy here. This is very interesting.
I'm not sure if he's the fall guy. As it turns out, again, he's been described to me as a Boy Scout. What he turns out to be is the person in that room, and we have to imagine this because that's what happened. It's in a room. There are people who are clearly arguing, saying like, no, we're going to get into line. We're going to jam them up. That's what we're going to do with the incoming national security advisor. So there is a room where this discussion is happening. And as it turns out, Bill Priestap is the one with some sort of conscience anyways. Like, is this the right thing to do? What do we really want here? Do we want to get to the truth, or do we want him to lie so we can get him fired? Do we want to push a Logan Act and refer him to the Department of Justice? What's really our point here? So you understand the shape of the room now. Now the important thing will be finding out precisely who is in that room. And we're starting to get a pretty good idea that there are senior FBI officials in that room. perhaps the director of the FBI himself at the time, James Comey, almost certainly the deputy director at the time, Andrew McCabe. So again, that's a very important thing to see what the shape of that room looks like and who is in that room and who's making that argument. And if there will be further documentation saying, oh no, this is exactly what Comey said. Here's exactly what McCabe said. So that's going to be very important to get to the bottom of this.
You know, it's quite amazing. Another thing that I've read recently is this that Judge Sullivan, who's the presiding judge in the Flynn case, is very, very, very serious about Brady evidence, right? Potential exculpatory evidence and so forth. And so it's very interesting. This is actually in Will Chamberlain's podcast. I was watching that recently, and he talks about this issue in particular. How is it possible that a Department of Justice prosecutor held back information like this from the defense?
Right. Well, General Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, has a great deal of experience taking on Department of Justice corruption. I think that she had a pretty good idea walking into this case what had happened. Again, that's what I mean. I think the general contours of what had happened were clear. And also, Ms. Powell knew where to look and the questions to ask. I think many people had been surprised about Judge Sullivan's demeanor toward General Flynn, especially a year and a half ago when he started saying that he was treasonous, traitorous, had betrayed his country. I think a lot of people were quite shocked. I think a lot of people were also shocked when he reprimanded Ms. Powell, accused her of plagiarizing some documents. So people have been surprised. I think right now, though, with the evidence that has been amassed, I would imagine that the judge is going to have to accept General Flynn's his plea to withdraw his guilty plea. I would find it very. I think it would be very difficult to believe him not allowing him to vacate his guilty plea. What will happen after that? Will the DOJ then turn its attention to the prosecutors as well as the FBI agents? It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, this is a Mueller team case, and we know what the Mueller team was tasked to do. The Mueller team was also tasked to participate in a cover-up operation. So what were the different prosecutors who were doing on this case up to? What was Van Grack up to? Why hadn't the documents that Ms. Powell requested, why weren't they made available? How much did he have to do with that? Again, how much did the FBI have to do with that? So we've seen something. It hasn't turned around entirely yet, but we certainly see the momentum is going in a different direction. For the last 3.5 years, General Flynn has, it's not just the DOJ and the FBI, the bad guys in these institutions. It's also the press. It's the legal experts, the talking heads you see on TV every night. And you saw them maybe recently after some of these documents started to come out on Twitter, still heaping garbage and dung on General Flynn because they themselves have something at stake in this. They themselves have something at stake in targeting General Flynn, and it's despicable and disgusting behavior. Nonetheless, what we're seeing now is the momentum is shifting. The wind is blowing in a different direction, and now it's at the back of Ms. Powell and General Flynn, and this is an excellent thing. This is cause for celebration. In spite of the fact that we've seen the different things that we've seen are evidence of, again, brazen corruption, a celebration of corruption, pride and contumely. The pleasure that these people take in corruption is repugnant, and it should make all Americans disgusted to see what federal law enforcement officers were doing, or that they could target any American citizen, never mind a retired 3-star general. So it's good. It's going the other way now.
It's amazing because I've actually seen, commentary, I think today, basically saying something along the lines of, hey, this is kind of routine, this type of activity, getting someone to lie or whatnot.
Right. Right. Yes. I mean, this is comical, right? The defense of the people who are defending the dirty cops in the FBI and the crooked prosecutors who were part of the Mueller team. The defense is, hey, they jam up people like that all the time. And these are people who used to call themselves, they probably do still call themselves friends of Mr. Comey, friends of Mr. Weissman. Say, hey, these guys do it all the time. That's what our friends do. They jam people up. This just happens to be a retired three-star general and not a drug dealer or not a terrorist. If that's true, then we have even more problems with the FBI than we thought. But here's the thing. The people who are saying this happens all the time. The people who were saying this were also people who were celebrating this operation run by dirty cops. And that's a rare thing. You don't see when the FBI are setting up drug dealers, right? Or when they're setting up Muslim Americans as terrorists, say that's happening. You don't see people getting on TV, talking heads or media people like, and it's a good thing they set them up. It's a good thing they target them. And that's what these people have been doing for 3 years. The press has allowed itself, it has leased itself out as a platform for these vicious operations targeting Trump team officials, targeting Americans, also non-Americans like Svetlana Lokova. It's disgusting what they did. So the idea that they themselves are turning around so quickly on a dime, hey, man, it happens all the time. You got to understand, that's what the FBI does. They're a bunch of dirty cops, and those are our friends. And that's why we supported their operation against General Flynn and everyone else.
Another thing before we leave this to the court case and kind of move on to a few other related areas,
Okay.
the defense counsel, right? There's this whole kind of question around the defense counsel not providing an adequate defense and so forth. I wonder if you could actually speak to that, because it seems like there's kind of big challenges from all sides, right?
Well, I mean, I think that I believe they still have many thousands of documents yet to produce, which they said, I remember it was earlier this week now, or if it was last week, saying that, oh yeah, we just found them. Look, one of the problems is that there was a conflict of interest that had been identified, and this was a bad thing. And then also, unfortunately, you look at the people who staffed that law firm. But the big question is, were they looking out for the interest of their client? And as we now see, it seems pretty clear they were not looking out for the interest of their client. They were looking out primarily for their own interest. And I don't mean to exculpate them, to give them a break in any ways, but it also gives you an indication of how hard charging that Mueller team must have been coming in. They said, we're going after your guy, we're going after your guy, and we want your guy to give us something on Trump. Now, we do know that this has happened before. This is what they did to Scooter Libby in 2003. Again, James Comey was part of that too, where the whole idea was, hey, if you give up Cheney, we'll let you walk. If you don't give up Cheney, we're going to stick everything on you. And it looks pretty clear that's precisely the same sort of thing they did with General Flynn. And his lawyers were a messenger for that. And I believe there's one of the documents which even shows that the lawyers are making that case to him. So, hey, do you have anything on Trump? Well, this appears to me very inappropriate, right? This appears to me that it's veering away from legal representation to, again, participating in a political operation. So yes, in addition to the Mueller team prosecutors, in addition to the FBI, there's going to be very serious questions asked of that law firm, Covington and Burling, the different people who were representing General Flynn.
And what was the conflict of interest? Can you lay that out for us?
Yeah, it had to do with a FARA case. FARA is a Foreign Agents Registration Act, and General Flynn started up a firm where he was this happens all the time in Washington, and represent different you represent different clients, and some of them are tied to foreign countries, and some of them are foreign businesses. It's a rather elaborate situation, the different laws and regulations that apply, whether someone has to register for FARA with the DOJ or register under a different thing with Congress. And General Flynn, as he said, was very careful. This is from his statement, I believe, January 2020, which I put it on Twitter, but I really encourage all of your viewers to go back and read General Flynn's statement from January 2020, where he's talking about how he wants to, withdraw his guilty plea. He talks about what happened. It's a deeply moving and important document, but I believe it's there where he makes the case. He told his lawyers, he said, be very precise. I want you to be precise. Again, remember, this is a serious man who served in the U.S. Army for 33 years. Precision is important. Precision should be important in law, and precision is certainly important in the military. He wanted them to be precise. It turns out that there were certain problems with their filings, and that appears to have been the lever that the Mueller team used against his legal representatives. The legal representatives, in turn, that was the conflict of interest right there. It appears that they are the ones who had made some sort of error in their filings. And that's when the Mueller team said, oh, we can put pressure on the law firm as well. So that's at the center of conflict of interest.
So with General Flynn, it's incredible how many different, I guess, instruments these prosecutors had to use, I guess, against him. It's the whole system. It's remarkable to me to even think about. One of the issues is also, one of the things that they used initially to attack Flynn was his conversation with Kislyak, with the Russian ambassador, right?
Right. This is bizarre if you look at what happened. It's very important because remember, President Obama was referred to as he always thought diplomacy was an important thing. And of course, diplomacy is an important thing. But what happened with the Obama administration? At the end of the Obama administration, they turned the Russian ambassador, right? They made him radioactive. Anyone who spoke with the Russian ambassador, whether it was Michael Flynn, whether it was Jeff Sessions, they tried to jam up Carter Page on this. Anyone who spoke to him was bad. Well, the Russian ambassador is in Washington for one thing, and that's to speak to American officials, right? So they perverted the idea of diplomacy. That's what happened with the Obama administration. They turned diplomacy on its head. Instead of being able to go to foreign officials and look, what's the primary thing, right? We want to avoid conflict. And Russia is an often adversarial power. How do we avoid conflict? Well, figure out what's really happening, discuss different issues. But what they did with Kislyak was they turned him into a pariah. So anyone who talked with him was now dirtied up and was now subject, if not an investigation, certainly hostile press coverage, because they would say, oh, so-and-so was talking with Sergei Kislyak. The idea that they turned this into an instrument to damage Trump team officials is an astonishing thing. An astonishing thing, especially, again, for an administration that that was so high on diplomacy as the way to solve different things. Here they are not only dirtying Trump team officials, but dirtying foreign diplomats.
I know we're going to find out a lot more, probably even today, before we get a chance to even publish this interview. But why don't you speak to these new documents that we were just looking at literally minutes before we started talking? What are you seeing in there? I mean, I can tell our viewers I posted a tweet that just said "wild and crazy" to one of these. Well, but what did you see?
Well, there's a big picture here, and it kind of ties together, I know, the other things we want to talk about, which is aspects of the IG report, We want to talk about the newly redacted footnotes. We want to talk about the excellent new article by Epoch Times today on Mr. Sergei Millian. So I know we want to cover all these big issues, but so let me just make it a big picture. What happens after Donald Trump is elected and the FBI has been participating in this spying campaign against Donald Trump? So Donald Trump has been elected. They know they're in big trouble. The first move is John Brennan, when he goes to Barack Obama or Barack Obama goes to him. They say, give me everything you had on Russian interference in the 2016 election. That's the first move. The next move we see is actually now this. This is one of the things these documents show. It shows that Peter Strzok goes and wants to find out if a bogus investigation they had on General Flynn was still open. Why did they want it to still be open? Because they need to target General Flynn. This is a central part of their cover-up operation. Why? Because this is an administration full of people who, many of whom are in Washington for the first time, right? A lot of them, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, James Mattis is now the former Secretary of Defense. He's now in a cabinet level position. Mike Pompeo is coming from Congress to the CIA. The one person with extensive experience in the intelligence community is Michael Flynn. They know that Michael Flynn is going to present serious troubles if Flynn starts asking for the reporting they were using to open up all these investigations on Donald Trump. And as it turns out, January 6th, that's January 4th, when Strzok goes to check if that investigation is still open because he sees an opportunity there. On January 6th, when Brennan, Comey, Clapper, when they briefed the intelligence community assessment to Donald Trump, and only Comey sticks around to brief him about the dossier, according to the IG report, one of Trump's national security officials wants to know about Steele sources. Right now, the FBI is starting to understand that they're in trouble because people are going to start to look. It's imperative that they go after General Flynn because General Flynn is the biggest problem for them. It's an enormous cover-up move. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the Russia disinformation aspect as well. This is also part of the cover-up. But what these documents show, again, is now they're starting to give us dates, right? Exactly when they started going after General Flynn after the election because they knew he was going to be trouble. So that's what we're seeing here. This is the other thing that we knew about, but now we're having more and more evidence of it. A massive cover-up operation to obscure what they did, to hide what they did. After they target General Flynn, they get him removed from the White House. The next step is to have the then Attorney General Jeff Sessions recuse himself. Now they're on the roll, on a roll. What happens next is James Comey testifies before the House Intelligence Committee, and he basically lays out an obstruction trap, saying, yes, we have an investigation going on. In so many words, the president. He was very careful in his wording, but he let it be known there was an investigation of the president of the United States. At that point, the president's legal team would have said, anything you do right now might lead to trouble. They might try to roll this into an obstruction charge. Next thing we have is in May, a special counsel is appointed after Comey is fired. So the reins of the coup and the reins of the cover-up are handed from James Comey to Robert Mueller. So that's what we're seeing. The picture is much fuller now. The evidence we have is much fuller. So that's why these documents are very, very important. It's not so much one item or two items. It's the way it's helping us fill out what happened, especially after the election. The IG report and other things are also helping us understand what happened before the election. But right now, it's after the election we're looking at, presumably when Attorney General William Barr says, I wanted the U.S. Attorney John Durham to look at things after the election too. That's what's really concerning. What happened after the election? Presumably, this is a very large part of it. The cover up, the different things that are going on, especially at the FBI. They're for certain happening at other places as well. But it looks like right now that's the center of it at the FBI.
So Lee, one of the things that's come out since these documents have been unsealed is I see a heck of a lot of people saying, whoever out there has thought of this whole thing as a conspiracy theory, this, targeting the plot against the president, as it's called in your book, right? Now it's certainly gone from being any sort of conspiracy theory to actual conspiracy or conspiracy fact. What's your take?
Absolutely. Well, I remember when I was reporting my book, The Plot Against the President, Congressman Nunes would talk about how it was very important for them to get to a certain point. They were trying to push American opinion, explain to people what happened, right? And they saw that it was steadily growing, that more and more people came to understand, including his fellow Republican members of Congress. They came to see the details and what he put forth. And so they did have a certain amount of growth. After a certain point, it can't go much further, right? And that's the nature, tragically, of the country right now. We talk about well, why shouldn't left-wingers, shouldn't they be suspicious of the intelligence services doing bad things? That's a fiction. That's not exactly how these things work, right? It's like, if the FBI and CIA is doing something politically advantageous to you, as it turns out, tragically, as we're seeing dramatized right here, they don't care. They don't care. So there's going to be a certain, it's very limited, the amount of people who will say, oh my goodness, I've been wrong. I thought it was a conspiracy theory. But as it turns out, it's really true. It's important for people to understand what mattered to these media organizations was not simply that they were motivated by an anti-Trump animus. It is essential to understand they were not merely complicit. They were not duped. They were not fooled into believing it. They were platforms for this entire operation. Without the press, none of this could have happened. They are the essential components of this entire operation, targeting Trump and targeting Trump officials. And this is why I've been saying for a while and writing it too, for the press, the entire operation, even before these revelations that we've seen the last week, even before this represented an extinction level event, these organizations will continue to exist by name in one fashion or another. But the fact is, we're in a very different place now. These people will never admit, these journalists, especially those deeply involved in it. And remember, some of these journalists who've covered this and who've pushed this operation are in their late 20s and early 30s. They may live for another 50 years. I can guarantee you they will guard this for the rest of their lives. There will be no time ever that they will ever reconsider what they did, because again, it's not as though they were fooled. They weren't tricked. They participated in an operation with the intelligence community. It doesn't get any more third world than that. When the Ministry of the Interior coordinates with the Ministry of Information. And in the third world, they never say we were wrong. They just roll it into another operation. And that's what will happen here too. So the people that we would like to see, we were wrong. Now it's time to go back and revisit how we got things wrong and how can we make sure we don't do this again. And we can really serve the American public and we can really play a positive role in our great country. That will never happen. The press that we have today is an entirely different thing. It's not a press. It's a rolling platform for information operations.
Wow, powerful words, Lee. And frankly, very, very difficult to stomach, even though we know some of the significant challenges out there right now.
It's a sad and terrible thing. As someone who has been involved in journalism for all of my career, my father was a journalist. My great grandfather was a typesetter at the Daily News. I mean, my family is deeply invested in this. I look at this from the inside and I say, what has happened is astonishing and destructive, and they will not recover from it. The upside that I believe is very important is that one of the things that we've learned that you've seen, I mean, there are alternative at Epoch Times, as Epoch Times has seen. There are other places for people to obtain information, for Americans to obtain information. And one of the great things about Twitter is, as nutty as it can be from time to time, the number of people who produce information on Twitter. So there's still a hunger for it. People still need it. People still believe it forms our democracy, because it does. But the places that people have been accustomed to getting it from, that won't happen anymore.
Yeah, I think, one of our columnists, Jeff Carlson, he calls it, our little corner of Twitter, I believe.
Yeah,
yeah, where a lot of, very...
Jeff is terrific. I had the pleasure of meeting your colleague recently in California. It was very fun, very nice.
So Lee, something super central to this whole cover-up, as you are describing it, this whole plot as you describe it, is of course the Steele dossier. And over with the IG report and the footnotes and other information that's come to bear, the validity of that dossier has been, completely undermined. In your book yourself, you outline four of these proto dossiers, which you believe were, the materials that formed the final dossier. One of the things that a lot of people are beginning to believe, and I know you don't, that's why I want to talk to you about it, is that the dossier is actually a product of Russian disinformation, right? And I know, and you are vehemently opposed to this interpretation. I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that.
Okay, well, it is a very interesting subject. I'm actually less concerned about it now than I was before. Look, because we know now, when we were talking about the notes that Bill Priestap is taking in that room, who's talking about framing Flynn, getting him to lie, we know one thing: there are no Russians in that room, right? There's no Russian saying, Vladimir, let's get Flynn to lie, right? Those are Americans. Those are American intelligence agents, right? So we understand what's happening now. That's the actual thing. This is the American intelligence services, not Russian intelligence services. But I know some of these newly declassified, not recently declassified footnotes that came out several weeks ago now, and that was the big news until we started getting more big news. There were indications that that different people had warned the FBI in 2017, in fact, January 12th, 2017, that a particular dossier item might have been infiltrated or might have been compromised by Russian intelligence. It's important to remember the entire dossier. The entire premise of the story is that all of this information comes from Christopher Steele's sources and subsources who have insight into the Russian government. In fact, the most important thing, the most important memo in the dossier is the very first thing. The most memorable one for everyone is about the P tape. That's the most memorable, but that's not the most important. The most important one is the one that says Donald Trump has been compromised by Russian intelligence. Really, who says so? A Russian intelligence officer. Now, the FBI has many problems. It's sad. It's a tragedy. I still like to look back at the Untouchables, Elliot Ness. We recognize the FBI has many problems, but you can't possibly tell me that something that comes in, no one in the FBI says, wait a minute, let me get this right. Who's the one who's saying that Trump is compromised by Russian intelligence officers? It's a Russian spy. Well, that's nonsense. Instead, what did they do? They used that to get a FISA. Did they ever check it? Not according to Bill Priestap. He said the dossier, verification of the dossier was in its infancy, not even according to the director of the FBI, James Comey. He called it unverified. So that claim went in there that a Russian spy said Trump is compromised by Russian spies. And when finally does someone decide to say there might be Russian disinformation here? January 12th, 2017, just as they're starting their cover up. That's what the Russian disinformation story is. It's part of a cover up. Look at the memo they're talking about. It's some memo about Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, in Prague. That's the one that gets their attention, that it might be compromised by Russian intelligence. Wait, do you mean the first dossier then? Source to a Russian spy saying Trump is a Russian spy, that one's okay. But the ones that we now think we have problems with, that's the one about Michael Cohen. So again, once we see that these warnings, the point that these warnings start to come into the FBI, that's part of their larger cover-up operation. How else do we know this? This is interesting, and I have to credit my friend and colleague Svetlana Lokova for coming up with this. If you go back to the original David Ignatius story about Michael Flynn, January 12th, 2017, targeting Michael Flynn, saying, did Flynn discuss sanctions with Sergei Kislyak? There's also a very, very important part of that, a very, very important part of that piece. And that is David Ignatius wonders, maybe this is Russian disinformation. Ah, there you have it. This is the operation. The whole idea that this is Russian disinformation is part of the cover-up. I understand why many of our colleagues on the right, why many Republican officials were happy to turn this around on Democrats and say, oh, it was not the Trump team that colluded with the Russians. It was actually Democrats who got fooled by Russian disinformation. I just want to give a general look into the future. If any of these people wind up in DC courtrooms, if any of the dirty cops from the FBI and DOJ wind up in DC courtrooms, I guarantee you that their defense lawyers will have portfolios full of statements and tweets and comments from all sorts of Republican officials and conservative thought leaders saying this is Russian disinformation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you're telling me you're charging my client as part of a conspiracy to do poorly at his job? Why, this is un-American. Pardon me for bleeding red, white, and blue here, but this is just un-American. Who among us has not done poorly at their job? That's the same thing with these guys. They got fooled by the Russians. It was Russian disinformation. Now, is that argument going to work? No. It's a Hail Mary pass, but that's all they're going to have. But that is going to be surprising to some people if they do wind up in court, to have some people hear their statements coming back to them out of the mouths of defense lawyers for people that we've rightly zeroed in on the last 3 years as dirty cops, corrupt prosecutors, rogue spies. So again, I just think it's important to understand where the Russia disinformation idea comes from. It's just the cover-up. There's no Russian disinformation in the dossier. It's all Clinton disinformation. What the dossier is, it's Google plus Fusion GPS libel. That's what it is. There is nothing in that entire 35-page document comprising 17 different memos allegedly authored by Christopher Steele that you and I, given an afternoon, could not make up entirely just by using the internet and letting our imaginations run wild. That's where it comes from. It's Clinton disinformation, not Russian disinformation.
Fascinating. So let's talk about Sergey Millian now. This is, one of the ostensible sources is brandished about by Christopher Steele, which we actually, as it would happen, and this wasn't planned, we have this article written by Pet Svab, really long-form piece looking into all the fascinating, conflicting realities around Sergey Millian. And so, and I know this is someone that you've been studying for a while as well.
Well, not as long as I should have been, because the evidence, as I think that Petra's excellent piece points to, it's real reporting. A lot of the other reporting on Mr. Millian hasn't been reporting. It's been directed to target Mr. Millian, and this is one of the things that we're seeing right now. This is one of the things that has come to the surface with the Inspector General's report. If you look, Mr. Millian is alleged to be person one. If you look at the documentary evidence in the IG report, where Steele's so-called primary subsource speaks to person one, and that's how he's downloading the information. They have a 15-minute phone call in which the primary subsource isn't even sure he's speaking with person one, but recognizes or appears to recognize his voice on YouTube. Once you look at that, it becomes clear what happens. Before the election, Sergey Millian was smeared as one of the points, one of the Trump campaign's points of collusion with Russia. He was smeared by a number of different periodicals, and we won't be surprised to hear where it originates with Fusion GPS. He was also smeared on broadcast TV. After the election, the FBI appears to take control, and they say Sergey Millian will be useful for us to plug him in as a source for the dossier. So before the election, he's smeared by the press and by Clinton campaign operatives, and afterwards, he is used by the FBI, again, as part of their cover-up operation to show that they had real sources. Again, there are no sources in the dossier either. This is entirely contrived. It'd be interesting to know who made these things up, but they needed to point at certain people or hang the dossier around certain people's necks to say, yes, we told you it's a real thing. And this person is one of the sources. So this is what they did to Sergey Millian. There is, again, I encourage people to go look at the IG report and read about this preposterous, this childish fantasy of the 15-minute phone call. There's evidence, some of it that your excellent reporter and your excellent publication got today. There's more evidence out there, and there will be more forthcoming to show, again, how the press and how the FBI targeted Mr. Millian. And unfortunately, it's a terrible thing. Mr. Millian left the country at a certain point. He's not in the country right now. He's an American citizen. So add him to the list of other people, including Michael Flynn, including Svetlana, Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, other people who weren't stuck in a dossier, but who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars defending themselves, who had their names smeared. Michael Caputo comes to mind. Add him to the list of people who were targeted and who were damaged and who've been left in the wake of this horrible path of destruction.
You know, Lee, gosh, we could talk for hours and hours more about sort of the nuances of some of this stuff. You know, it's interesting when I read the Millian piece that Petra put together. I still, a lot of questions remain. You know, it's interesting. It's interesting how you how you've interpreted that. I want to talk a little bit about how this has actually occupied an incredible amount of time and headspace of not just our intelligence communities, but the entire American public in different ways. Of course, the little corner of Twitter, media, mainstream media, newer media. And you've actually done some writing, which I frankly was quite impressed with, about the issue of China and the Chinese Communist Party. And I hadn't realized, given your focus and the writing you had done, this is actually something that was of interest to you. And what really struck me with this, with this juxtaposition, is that this could have easily been something that you would have been focusing on for the last however many years, right?
Right.
Because of its importance, because of the strategic importance of China and the role of the Chinese Communist Party. And frankly, as we're seeing through coronavirus or CCP virus, as we call it at the Epoch Times, aggression and just again, sort of a lot of bad acting on a giant state actor, so to speak. So I want to talk a little bit about that to finish up.
Right.
How much this thing has sort of dominated the news cycle, the whole kind of zeitgeist for years. Of course, less and less as more evidence came, to show that there is, that it's a conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, and so forth. How much time have we lost because of this, and should we have been looking elsewhere?
Yes, definitely. I mean, they obstructed a presidency for at least 3 years, right? And then they rolled that into the bogus impeachment process. Well, I'll start on the macro level, right? I mean, Congressman Nunes has said many times, even before the CCP virus, as you guys call it, even before this, he said, look, with Trump elected, it was important for us to start looking at some of the things that China was up to. And what happened instead? The House Intelligence Committee was instead consumed with this nonsense about Russiagate. It was not, I don't believe that Russiagate was constructed to obscure the things that China was doing. But if you look at the amount of attention paid to a conspiracy theory, right? And if you look at the very serious things that the Chinese have been doing and the ways that the Chinese have been interfering, not only in our elections, but people, you remember there was a cottage industry of people writing about Russian disinformation, the $100,000 that the Russians spent on Facebook, Russian disinformation. We have to be very worried about Russian disinformation. As it turns out, once you move that aside, you see the real issue, which we've seen since the onset of COVID-19. We've seen in very uncomfortable ways that the press, their anti-Trump messaging has dovetailed with the CCP's propaganda campaign, which is anything from anti-Trump to call it a Chinese virus, or even to note that it comes from Wuhan. This is racist. I think that the U.S. press is actually controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, though we should pay attention to the fact that both the New York Times and the Washington Post use paid inserts in their paper from China daily. That's a significant thing that we should actually pay attention to. But the fact that the Chinese Communist Party understands the different sensitivities and sensibilities of the American public, and they know if they can message us on racism, that this will shut up many critics and many people who are simply pointing out the facts, what happened here. So that's at a very small level. But again, at a much larger level, we lost 3 years actually looking at something very important, and we now see how important it is. One of the pieces that I wrote for Tablet Magazine about the Chinese, I quote Senator Cotton, who says, I think a lot of Americans didn't understand that our penicillin is manufactured or is made in China. And he said, this has to stop. We have to start to move our manufacturing base back here. So we lost 3 years on that. Our attention now needs to focus on that. It's very important. It's very important that we round up the bad guys who are responsible for targeting Americans, targeting the Trump campaign. It's very important that we round them up. But the strategic focus of the United States, and I am optimistic we can do this, is to focus on what the Chinese Communist Party is up to. It's a very, very serious issue. And I am optimistic that there are a lot of people. Look, we're very fortunate insofar as the president of the United States was, at least in part, if not in large part, elected because he talked about the different problems with China, right? Whether this was manufacturing, whether this was us sending our jobs off, right? No one has really, while so many people have marveled at how the Chinese Communist Party has managed to raise 800 million people out of poverty over recent years, no one has really noticed that that's coincided with the impoverishment of our working class, right? With the impoverishment of our of people who make things in the United States, right? So while many Chinese have gotten wealthier, look, regular people, fine, God bless them. That's an important thing. But the idea that our elites were also profiting from this, political and business elites were profiting from this while Americans were hurting, while jobs were actually going to China. And you remember Trump said he was going to get those jobs back. And that's when President Obama mocked him and said, what magic wand are you going to wave to get those back? Well, this is clearly important for President Trump. So at least we're fortunate that it's a president who understands the problems. And there are different people like Senator Cotton, like Representative Gallagher. And there are also Democrats who take this serious as well, like Chuck Schumer, like Sherrod Brown, like Ron Wyden. And there are problems on both sides of the aisle, too, Republicans as well as Democrats, who are not as sharp on China as they should be. My hope, I think the hope for all of us is that the American public, looking at what happened here and looking at the serious threats that the Chinese Communist Party does pose to our national security, both now, as we understand, not just abroad, but here at home. I do believe that we can bring this into focus, and that this is something actually that, again, people from both sides of the aisle can bear down on and start to address immediately.
Lee, that's a powerful place to finish up. I also hope that this issue, which of course we've been covering since our inception for 20 years, does indeed become the bipartisan issue, does indeed become the thing that kind of can bring America together. And so, such a pleasure to have you on again.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks. It's always lovely to speak with you, and thanks so much for inviting me.